The campfire had burned down to a ring of glowing embers, casting long shadows that twitched and crawled like restless spirits against the alien jungle. The night air was thick, wet enough to feel like a damp cloth pressed against the skin, and every chirp, rustle, and low-throated growl from the surrounding trees seemed to echo louder than it should. Most of the camp's inhabitants slept in huddled clusters, wrapped in thermal blankets that steamed faintly in the cool mist. They were an assortment of traders, researchers, and a few mercenaries for hire, all here for reasons they didn't care to share. The only human among them, Sergeant Eli Stone, was lying on his back with his hands folded behind his head, eyes closed, breathing slow. The others didn't understand him. The locals, reptilian traders from the Yawned faction, had taken one look at his lack of armor, his open jacket, and the lazy grin he wore during the day and decided the human was either a fool or suicidal. Out here, on SCI-FI, nights belonged to predators that made a meal of almost anything smaller than a shuttle. And Eli was 6 feet of slow, unarmored, soft meat. Still, he didn't seem worried. From the far edge of camp, Vreth, the quartermaster, was keeping the night watch, tail flicking nervously as he scanned the tree line. He didn't like humans, but he'd been warned about this one specifically. The captain had told him, "Don't try to scare him into following protocol. Just let him be. He's seen worse." That had sounded like the usual bravado species pride nonsense, but now, staring at Eli lying there as if the jungle wasn't alive with eyes and teeth, Vreth was starting to wonder. A branch cracked in the darkness. Not the soft, incidental break of a small animal. This was heavy. Deliberate. The kind of sound you didn't want to hear on SCI-FI after sundown. Vreth's pupils widened, and his claws clicked against the stock of his rifle. Another crack, closer this time. The night chatter of insects stopped abruptly, like a crowd holding its breath. The air thickened with the scent of wet musk and iron. Vreth's scales prickled, and the mercenaries stirred uneasily in their sleep. Something was out there. Something big. From where Eli lay, a single eye opened, slow, lazy, but sharp. The predator emerged from the tree-line like a shadow peeling itself free from the dark. It was massive, 12 feet from nose to tail, its fur modeled to blend perfectly with the foliage until it stepped into the emberlight. It had the low, stalking gait of a creature that knew it was the apex in every scenario. Muscles bunched under its hide, and its jaws flexed, showing teeth the length of a man's fingers. It was called a dust prowler, one of the deadliest creatures on SCI-FI. The locals avoided them by a simple rule: you didn't camp where the trees bent under claw marks, you didn't leave food out, and you definitely didn't light fires that smelled like cooking meat. Vreth now realized, with a cold knot forming in his gut, that their fire had been roasting fresh jungle fowl just hours ago. They'd drawn it in without meaning to. The mercenaries closest to the fire were waking now, eyes wide, hands fumbling for weapons. The dust prowler padded closer, silent but for the wet rasp of its breathing. Its eyes glowed faintly gold in the dim light, fixed on the camp, head low, tail lashing slowly. Then, without warning, it broke into a silent rush. Vreth's hand twitched toward the trigger, but he froze. The thing was too close, too fast, and the others were still scrambling. The only one between the predator and the rest of them was Eli. The human sat up. Not fast. Not panicked. Just sat up, rubbing his eyes like someone woken by an annoying alarm. He blinked at the massive predator charging straight at him, let out a cavernous yawn, and, in a voice that carried through the stunned silence, asked, "You want breakfast or something?" The dust prowler stopped. Dead in its tracks. Its massive body crouched low, hackles raised, lips peeled back in a hiss. But its head tilted ever so slightly, as if the words had short-circuited the primal sequence of hunt-kill-feed. Eli stretched his arms above his head, spine popping audibly, then reached into his pack without breaking eye contact. The camp was frozen, mercenaries holding rifles halfway to their shoulders, Vreth gripping his weapons so tightly his claws hurt, the researchers peeking from behind crates. Eli pulled out a strip of dry jerky. He tore off a piece with his teeth and chewed slowly, then flicked another piece into the dirt a few meters in front of the predator. The dust prowler's nose twitched. It stayed tense, but its eyes tracked the morsel. Slowly, muscles coiling like a drawn bow, it inched forward, each step deliberate. Its massive head dipped to sniff the meat, and its jaws parted just enough to snap it up. It chewed once, twice, then swallowed. A deep rumble vibrated in its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Eli tossed another piece. By now, the rest of the camp had gone from frozen terror to slack-jawed disbelief. Vretha's tail lashed in agitation. "Human!" he hissed. "That is a dust prowler. It will not stop eating just because you—" Eli waved a hand without looking away from the beast. "Shh. You'll hurt its feelings." The predator padded closer, stopping just short of the human. Its breath was hot and rank with the scent of raw meat and jungle rot. Eli met its gaze, unflinching, and slowly extended his hand, palm open. The dust prowler leaned in, sniffed, and, much to the horror of everyone watching, pressed its snout into his palm. The rumble in its chest deepened. Eli scratched the spot between its eyes like you might for a house cat. The massive predator's eyes narrowed to slits, and its tail gave a slow, lazy sway. Then, with a kind of reluctant grace, it lay down right there beside him, its head resting against his thigh. The embers popped in the silence. Someone dropped a canteen. The sound made everyone flinch except Eli and the beast. Vretha's mind was a chaos of disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The predator should have mauled the human in under 5 seconds. Instead, it looked like Eli had just adopted it. "You can't be serious," one of the mercenaries muttered. "You're, what, friends now?" Eli smirked. "Nah. Just breakfast buddies." The rest of the night passed without another sound from the treeline. The dust prowler dozed beside the human, occasionally lifting its head when something rustled in the brush, but it never moved to attack. The others in the camp stayed wide awake, not out of fear of the jungle anymore, but out of the sheer absurdity of what they were seeing. And as the first light of dawn crept through the canopy, the predator stood, stretched, and slunk back into the shadows without a backward glance. Eli lay back down, closed his eyes, and muttered, "Guess that's my alarm clock taken care of." Vreth just stared at him, tail stiff, unsure if the human was brave, insane, or both. What he did know was that the jungle had rules, and Eli Stone had just broken one so completely that Vreth wasn't sure if the planet would ever be the same. And somewhere out there, the dust prowler was probably telling its own kind about the strange hairless predator who offered it breakfast instead of running. The morning mist still clung to the camp like a cold blanket, beating against every piece of gear and dripping from the edges of tents. Most of the camp was silent except for the distant metallic clatter of breakfast tins and the occasional hiss of a portable kettle. But the quiet wasn't peace, it was tension stretched tight enough to hum. The mercenaries kept glancing toward the treeline, rifles slung but ready. The researchers whispered in small clusters, their voices low and uncertain, their eyes flicking toward Eli as if he were a puzzle they hadn't quite decided to solve. Even the Wairar traders, normally sharp-tongued and dismissive of other species, kept their scaled jaws shut. Vreth, as quartermaster, was trying to focus on ration distribution. His claws tapped against data pads, counting out meal packs and checking the remaining inventory. But his tail gave him away, twitching in short, sharp arcs like a needle on a sensor reading something it didn't understand. He'd seen strange things before. He'd been on planets where the very ground could kill you. But never, had he seen a dust prowler break its hunt to cuddle. Eli, meanwhile, was sitting on an upturned crate, whistling tunelessly while carving at a strip of wood with his utility knife. He hadn't said a word since alarm clock last night. He didn't look like a man who had been inches from having his skull crushed in the jaws of a predator. If anything, he looked bored. That was the part that bothered Vreth most. "Human," Vreth finally said, striding over with a tail flick that could have cut cloth. "What exactly did you do last night?" Eli didn't look up. "Gave it a snack. Scratched its head." Vretha's frills flared. "That thing has killed fully armed hunting parties." It has eaten half my cousin's caravan last migration cycle. Eli's knife shaved a thin curl of wood. Guess it wasn't hungry for Wyrar last night. Vretha's jaw clicked shut with frustration. You are going to get us all killed. Eli shrugged. You're still alive, aren't you? Before Vreth could retort, a sharp chime came from one of the perimeter sensors. The sound cut through the camp chatter instantly. Everyone froze. The mercenaries snapped their weapons up. The traders ducked behind supply crates. The researchers fumbled for data pads, checking readings. Vretha's blood went cold. The chime wasn't the warning for a single large predator. It was the long, drawn-out tone for multiple inbound signatures. And they were coming fast. Through the mist, the first shape emerged, sleek, low, and unmistakable. Another dust prowler. Then a second. A third. Shapes moved in the shadows beyond, pacing the edges of visibility. The camp's defenses, a half-ring of portable barriers and a few sensor-linked turrets, suddenly looked laughably inadequate. The mercenary captain barked orders. Form firing line! Don't let them breach! Weapons hummed to life, the air tasting faintly of ozone. The tension was a live wire now, seconds from sparking into chaos. Eli didn't join the firing line. Instead, he stood, tucked the half-carved wood into his pocket, and stepped casually toward the approaching predators. What are you doing? Vreth hissed, panic sharpening his voice. They'll rip you apart. Eli raised a hand without looking back. Relax. Might be they're just stopping by for breakfast. The mercenaries shouted for him to get back, but Eli kept walking until he was well past the barrier line. The closest dust prowler stopped, its golden eyes locked on him. The others fanned out in a loose semicircle, muscles taut, tails swaying. For a long, breathless moment, nothing moved. Then, from the left flank, the largest dust prowler padded forward. Recognition flickered in its eyes, the same beast from last night. It sniffed the air, chuffed softly, and took a slow step toward Eli. He grinned. Morning, sunshine. He reached into his pack and pulled out a sealed ration tin. The other predators shifted, clearly interested. Eli popped the seal, and the rich scent of smoked meat rolled out into the mist. The dust prowlers' heads lifted, nostrils flaring. The camp behind him was a knot of disbelief and dread. The mercenary captain's voice was low but urgent. If they charge, we open fire. I don't care if the human's in the way. Eli crouched, set the tin on the ground, and stepped back. The lead predator padded forward, sniffed, then began to eat. The others hesitated. Predators didn't share food easily, but when Eli tossed a second tin toward them, they converged. What happened next made Vretha's frills curl in shock. The dusk prowlers didn't fight. They ate warily, side by side. Eli kept tossing food, speaking in a low, even tone. The predators seemed to relax, shoulders loosening, tails lowering. The one from last night came close again, nudging Eli's hip with its massive head. He patted it absently, like someone greeting a neighbor's dog. It wasn't supposed to be possible. Dust prowlers were solitary hunters. They didn't gather like this unless it was to bring down prey too large for one to handle. But here they were, 8 of them, sitting in the morning mist, eating from ration tins like oversized house pets. Vretha's mind raced. If the human could do this, what else could he do? And why? No one could tame a dust prowler, certainly not overnight. But before he could voice any of those thoughts, a sharp, piercing screech cut through the air. The predators froze, heads snapping toward the sound. A second later, the jungle erupted with movement, not dust prowlers this time, but something else. Larger. Heavier. The predators backed away from the camp, muscles tense, eyes on the tree-line. Eli straightened, scanning the shadows. Oh, he said lightly. That's not breakfast company. From the dark undergrowth, something massive pushed through, a creature built like a living wall, covered in chitinous plates, its forelimbs tipped with scything claws. The dusk prowlers gave it a wide berth. Predators feared nothing on SCI-FI, except this. The mercenaries swore under their breath. The captain barked orders to fall back to the inner barrier. Vreth felt his throat tighten. If the dusk prowlers wouldn't fight it, what chance did they have? Eli, though, just rolled his shoulders. Guess we'll need to get creative. And with that, he stepped toward the monster, as if he just remembered he had somewhere to be. The jungle went dead silent again, that strange, unnatural pause that made the hair on the back of every neck in camp stand on end. Even the dawn mist seemed to pull back, revealing the full shape of the thing lumbering toward them. It was a Threshmaw. Vreth had only ever seen one in Holos. In person, it was worse, far worse. The beast stood nearly 4 meters at the shoulder, its hide a layered armor of overlapping black chitin plates, each scarred with old battles. Its head was like some horrific blend of insect and reptile, with mandibles that clicked in a slow, deliberate rhythm, and eyes that shimmered with a deep, oily red. The air stank of sulfur and rot. The dusk prowlers backed away farther, their tails low, their golden eyes locked on the intruder. Some slunk into the mist, disappearing entirely. A few lingered closer to Eli, but even they paced nervously, ears flat. Predators didn't often emit fear, but when they did, the smart ones paid attention. The mercenaries didn't need an order, they snapped their rifles to ready, setting their firing arcs. Vreth could hear the click of safety releases all around him, the faint hum of charging energy cells. The portable turrets along the barrier line swiveled to track the beast. The Threshmaw stopped just beyond the perimeter. It tilted its head slightly, studying the camp. Its mandibles clicked again, faster now. That's a hunting rhythm, Vreth muttered without realizing. Eli heard him. Yeah. I figured. Then, instead of retreating to safety, Eli stepped past the barrier line again. The captain barked. Stone! Get your ass back in here before it notices me? Eli said over his shoulder. I think it already has. The Threshmaw's head tracked him the way a turret might track a target, slow, steady, inevitable. Its forelimbs flexed, claws sinking into the dirt. The air was thick enough to chew. Eli stopped about 20 meters out, planted his boots, and did something no one expected. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yawned. Loudly. The Threshmaw didn't react, at least, not like the dusk prowler had. Its mandibles twitched, and it took one slow, earth-shaking step forward. Eli reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the half-carved piece of wood from earlier, and tossed it aside. Then he unhooked a small cylindrical device from his belt, one of the camp's sonic deterrents, meant to drive away mid-tier predators. Except instead of switching it on, he popped the back open and pulled something out, a piece of what looked like dull metal mesh. Vreth! Eli called. You ever use a signal lure? Vreth blinked. That's bait for pack hunters. It mimics distress calls. Exactly, Eli said, kneeling and starting to connect the mesh to his wrist comm. Let's see if Bug Boy here likes the sound of lunch. The mercenary captain cursed. You're going to bring more predators. But before the argument could start, Eli pressed a sequence on his comm. A sound erupted, high, ragged, like the cry of some wounded jungle beast. It wasn't loud in the human range of hearing, but Vreth's frills flattened against his head instinctively. Around them, the dusk prowlers froze. And then, from somewhere deep in the mist, another roar answered. Not a Threshmaw. Not a dusk prowler. Something else. The Threshmaw reacted instantly, swiveling toward the sound. Its mandibles flared open in what might have been agitation, or anticipation. Eli grinned. Oh good. He's hungry for something else. The jungle shook as another predator came into view, sleek and scaled, with a long neck and jaws bristling with teeth, moving in a low, predatory glide. A razorback strider. Normally, even dusk prowlers avoided those. Vreth realized, in a slow dawning horror, what Eli had done. He had called in another apex predator, right into the Threshmaw's path. The two monsters locked eyes. The strider hissed, the Threshmaw's mandibles clicked in a machine gun staccato, and then they charged each other. The sound of their collision was like a tree snapping in a hurricane. Chitin plates clashed against teeth and claws, the air filled with dust and the deep, animal roars of a fight for dominance. The jungle erupted into chaos as smaller creatures fled. Eli jogged backward toward the camp, grinning like a man who just tossed a lit grenade into a rival's tent. See? Why fight it yourself when you can let something else do the work? The mercenaries stared at him. You baited it into a fight with a strider? One said in disbelief. Eli shrugged. Worked, didn't it? It was working, sort of. The Threshmaw and the Strider were tearing into each other with a fury that made the ground tremble. But as Vreth watched, he realized something. The fight was drifting toward the camp. Human! He snapped. Your plan is bringing them closer. Eli's grin faded a notch. Right. Time for phase 2. He whistled sharp 2 notes. The dust prowler from last night, still lingering near the perimeter, lifted its head. It looked at Eli, then at the battle, then back to Eli again. Eli pointed toward the Threshmaw and barked. Go on, get in there! To Vreth's shock, the beast actually moved, circling wide, calling to the others in short, low growls. Within moments, 4 duskprowlers broke from the mist and joined the fray, darting in and out, harrying the Threshmaw from the sides. The camp watched in stunned silence as the apex predators of SCI-FI, species that never hunted together, coordinated their attacks. The Threshmaw was still a mountain of armor and rage, but now it was bleeding from multiple angles. And in the middle of it all, Eli just stood there, hands on his hips, like a man watching his breakfast order being cooked. The fight was far from over, but one thing was clear. The human had somehow turned the deadliest night in SCI-FI's jungle into a predator brawl of his own making. Vreth, clutching his rifle, stared at him. You're insane. Eli smiled faintly. No. I'm adaptable. The battle in the clearing had reached a fever pitch. The Threshmaw's chitin was split in jagged lines where the Strider's teeth had sunk deep, green ichor leaking in thick ropes. The Strider's flanks were shredded from the Threshmaw's claws, its movements now jerky and uneven. And weaving between them like phantoms, the duskprowlers struck and retreated, slashing tendons, tearing at exposed flesh, never lingering long enough to be caught. The ground shook with every impact. The camp's portable barriers flickered under the vibrations, and the mercenaries braced against them, rifles at the ready in case the chaos spilled too close. The researchers huddled low, clutching their datapads as though data would shield them. Vreth could feel his pulse in his throat, too fast, too loud. Eli, though, still hadn't drawn a weapon. He crouched at the barrier line, eyes darting, calculating. He wasn't watching the fight like it was a spectacle. He was tracking something. Vreth! He called suddenly. How deep's that ravine west of camp? Vreth blinked. 20 meters drop. Sharp rocks. Why? Eli's grin returned, sharp and knowing. Perfect. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small cluster of charges, compact concussion devices meant for collapsing tunnels. To Vreth's horror, Eli didn't attach them to a rifle launcher. He just grabbed a length of paracord and started tying them together. You're going out there again? Vreth's frills shot upright. Not going, Eli said, slinging the charges over his shoulder. Guiding. Before anyone could stop him, he jogged around the barrier, moving low and fast along the jungle edge. The predators were too locked in their savage brawl to notice the lone human skirting the fight. Eli reached the far side of the clearing and positioned himself between the combat and the direction of the ravine. Then he raised the sonic lure again, toggled its settings, and let it scream. This time the sound was sharper, more urgent, like the frantic cry of something cornered and dying. The effect was immediate. The Threshmaw's head snapped toward him, mandibles flaring. The Strider, seeing its opponent falter, lunged, but Eli was already moving, sprinting toward the ravine. He shouted as he ran, waving his arms, making himself the loudest, most obvious target in the jungle. The Threshmaw took the bait. With a guttural roar, it barreled after him, the ground quaking with its charge. The Strider followed, unwilling to let its rival claim this prey. The duskprowlers darted behind, driving both monsters forward like a living tide. From the camp, Vreth shouted something, maybe a warning, maybe a curse, but Eli didn't slow. He could hear the claws digging furrows into the soil behind him, feel the hot, reeking breath getting closer. He reached the ravine's edge and, without hesitation, hurled the cluster of charges into the gap. The parcord caught on a jut of rock halfway down. Eli turned, just in time to see the Threshmaw's armored head crest the rise behind him. He thumbed the detonator and dove sideways. The explosion was a deep, concussive whump that rolled through the ground like thunder. The blast shattered the rock at the ravine lip, collapsing it forward. The Threshmaw and the Strider had no time to stop. The earth gave way beneath their weight, and both creatures tumbled into the chasm in a screaming, twisting mass of claws, teeth, and splintered chitin. Dust billowed into the air, choking and gritty. Eli coughed, waving it away, then peered over the edge. The two monsters lay far below, still moving but trapped, their fight reduced to snarls and the wet sound of futile strikes. They weren't climbing out any time soon. Behind him, the dusk prowlers stood at the ravine's edge, watching. The one from the first night padded closer to Eli, bumped his shoulder with its massive head, and then, almost reluctantly, turned and vanished into the mist. The others followed without a sound, melting back into the jungle. Eli stood there a moment longer, breathing hard, before making the long walk back to camp. When he stepped through the barrier, every eye was on him. The mercenaries looked like they couldn't decide whether to cheer or arrest him. The researchers just stared. And Vretha's tail twitched once before he spoke. "You," the Wairar said slowly, "are utterly, irreparably insane." Eli smirked. "You keep saying that. I keep thinking resourceful." The captain broke the silence with a short, sharp laugh. "Well, Stone, I can't argue with results. You just turned the deadliest night on this rock into a breakfast invitation and a demolition project." Eli shrugged. "What can I say? Sometimes you feed the monsters. Sometimes you introduce them to something bigger." That night, the camp slept without a single rustle from the tree-ling. The predators were busy licking their wounds in the ravine. And somewhere, deep in the jungle, a dusk prowler might have been wondering about the strange, fearless human who'd offered it breakfast instead of blood. Eli lay back in his tent, hands behind his head, and grinned into the dark. "Guess tomorrow," he murmured, "I'll have to figure out what's for lunch."